I feel nauseous, believe me. Never had a lot of shit come easy. Had to work hard, struggle just to be me. Had to and what was left over I put towards my dreaming. But the only thing in life that has meaning are the things you gotta work for, believe me. Take into your hands a plan, your own hands can land your own brand. And damn, I feel like no one takes accountability. They want the credibility, convincingly unwilling to put in the hours it takes to get some power. Don't be f***ing sour, take a cold shower. Scream until you're louder, work until you're prouder. And f*** all the doubters, they're just your downers. I swear to God they all let me down. I always fought.
I can tell you that 7 years after Freddie Gray, that was 2015, spring, April, May. This is 2022. Communities like Sandtown, all we saw then and now in terms of investment was a renovated Western District Police Station and a new funeral home. That's what West Baltimore got. A new police station and a new funeral home. What kind of optics are they? Was Freddie Gray any different than 1968 Baltimore riots? Dr. King's passing, killing, murder? This is the same?
No, it wasn't. I mean, I think, well, first of all, people who are being violent and burning, that's, you know, all that's the same. But the point is what was the cause and what were they attempting to register?
I always fought just to wear the crown. I'm off at these fucking clowns.
I love you.
They deserve an ounce. It's
Got next. And I'll be for.
It's only worth it if you work for it. I won't stop till they hear me now. I won't stop till I wear the crown. I swear to God they don't let me down. I always fought just to wear the crown. I'm off at these fucking
Good morning. First name's Donnie, last name's Glover. In it to win it for the long haul, baby. Today we're being joined via phone by Professor Larry Gibson, law professor. Professor Gibson, good morning to you.
Good morning, Donnie.
You know, first of all, we have to commend you. I got word from behind the scenes on some of the guidance that you gave to candidate Wes Moore. One being how Oprah would be of help. And initially I said, no way. But you were right.
Well, one of the other opponents had one of my other heroes, Barack Obama. Now, he was using an old tape of President Obama from several years ago, but it was being effective. And so West needed his superstar also, and Oprah Winfrey worked out just well.
And I tell you something else I was wrong about. Halfway wrong. That Oprah is to be commended. I mean, she helped us get the first black president, and November the 8th, God willing, Jesus tarries and the creek don't rise, we get our first black governor here in the state of Maryland.
That is correct. That sister's done a lot of good all over the world. She's done a lot of good.
So the question for you is, when it comes to Maryland politics, I guess you're like the heavyweight champ now.
I am just the old dude. I'm 80 years old, and I've had some involvement with the politics here in this state over those. No.
After this one, you can play humble. After this one, we got to come up with a new title. I call it the architect. That's what I call you, the architect.
Well, just a brother trying to make things better.
Well, on that note, you were also involved in the campaign in the election of the first Black elected mayor of Baltimore. So it's time for a new book, Professor Gibson.
Yeah, Kurt Smoke did a good job. Yes, I've had a pretty good run. My first citywide election was 1968 when we elected the first Black citywide Judge Joseph Howard
from Iowa.
Yes, he had moved. He moved here from Iowa, and then in 1970 we had a good year. 1970 we elected Karen Mitchell to Congress, Senator Blount to the Senate, and I was the campaign manager for Milton Allen, our first African American state's attorney. Well, we got another judge. Yep, 1970 was a good year. And off and on, I've dabbled in a little bit here and there.
Well, I'm glad these things happen because I got a question for you. Would you say that Michael Steele and Boyd Rutherford are that Westmore is a part of the same continuum when it comes to Black elected officials?
I'm not sure exactly what you're saying there. I mean, clearly Michael Steele was the first African American elected lieutenant governor, and so in that sense, even if there was another barrier passed at that time. So in that sense, I guess you're correct.
Okay, but you're a staunch Democrat, and you don't play about that. I remember seeing you down the farmer's market. I'm not sure what election was going on, but when you campaign, you go all out.
Well, I certainly do not ask people to do anything that I don't do. So if we're going to be putting up signs, I'm going to put up just as many as anybody else, which is handing out leaflets at farmers markets. I'm going to be right there. I guess in my old ROTC training, I never learned anything above the rank of lieutenant. You know, the captains and the generals all say, y'all go out there, but the lieutenants say, follow me. So I guess I never got promoted past lieutenant.
But also, Professor, you have mentored countless law students of all races here in the state of Maryland and beyond. How does that feel?
I am very proud of my career as a law professor. This is the 50th year.
Wow.
I started teaching law in 1972, taught a couple of years at the University of Virginia, came to the University of Maryland in 1974, and I have just simply delighted in watching my students take on high public office, become very successful lawyers and business persons, and take on other leadership roles. So yes, my proudest set of achievements relate to what my students have done. And I've also just enjoyed watching their families grow. And one of the things that I take real special delight is teaching two members, two generations of the family. I'm up to that I'm aware of 29 families where I've taught the parents and the child, but there are probably others because I just started asking my students at the beginning of the semester a few years ago, is there anyone here whose mother or father I've taught? So there are probably more than that, but I delighted that.
Professor, there is a very special woman in your life. I wanted to get some advice on love from you.
Well, I have just been blessed with my wife, Diana Gibson. Anna Lewis Gibson. We've been married. Next year will be our 50th year. And
congratulations.
for the early parts of the year, I would just tell the guys that I knew, please don't tell Diana how beautiful she is.
Why?
I was feeling insecure. Because in addition to being a brilliant a woman, she's beautiful. And so, but now I feel secure now. I mean, after these 50 years, I think I'm kind of safe. And she is a remarkable a person.
What is a lesson that we could learn in terms of how to get along?
Well,
you know something.
Well, just to be clear, that at least for me, not having any illusion that I'm in charge.
Even the great Larry Gibson.
Yes, dear. Is the answer to a lot of questions that come up.
I understand. I am with you, Professor. Professor, right now, term limits is a topic du jour. Your thoughts?
Well, Baltimore has suffered over the last decade from too much turnover in leadership, elected leadership and administration leadership. I mean, just think that we're now on our fourth mayor in the last decade. Our Baltimore City Council, there are 14 members, 7 of them are in the first term. They've been in office less than 2 years. And this has been continued, this turnover, through the administrative parts of city government. We generally keep our public works directors we had up until the last decade, 4 decades, because it's a complicated job and has many aspects to it. It deals with crime, it deals with grime and trash collections and potholes. Well, we're in our 3rd public works director in the last decade. We're on our 5th police commissioner. Think of that. In the last 10 years, we've had 5 police commissioners. And now we've got on the ballot a change in the city charter that would make things worse. We need less turnover in city government. They need more stability, not increased instability. So I just hope the voters of Baltimore will pay enough attention to this to vote against Question K. It is.
Are you being too polite about this, Professor?
Well, I'm trying to be clear about it. You may be pointing out that who is and what is behind this. That's another story. But just on its merits, it's a bad idea. But one has to also point out that this is being promoted by and paid for by a media group, Sinclair Broadcasting Group, that owns many television stations, mostly conservative stations around the country, and in Baltimore, it's Fox 45 WBFF. And as I think most of us know, that station has been waging an unbalanced and unfair media attack on Baltimore, and the chairman of that company, Sinclair Broadcasting Company, paid $368,000 to get this put on the ballot. That is a concern. I don't think that media companies ought to be trying to tell us how to structure our government. So yes, that's a concern. But most importantly, it's just a bad idea. We need more stability. The last thing that we need in Baltimore City right now is more instability. We've suffered over the last 10 years by having too much change in all levels of city government. Let's this thing settle down for a while.
You know, last night when we were talking, I brought up the example of Coppin State. With all due respect to the current president, I was there. I finished under Dr. Calvin Burnett. And of course, he had been there 32 years. And I said to you that ever since Dr. Burnett, we've had a series of stepfathers. And it's hard to like any one of them when they don't stay long, because then you say, like, well, you're abusing my mother. And that's kind of the sentiment I'm getting, that conservative forces are being abusive to the people of Baltimore, a 62% black city.
Well, they think that we're not going to pay close enough attention to this. You know, these questions generally pass, and everyone has been focused on problems arising from the pandemic and other issues. They pay people to collect these signatures at the farmers markets, and I think they hoped to just pass this and destabilize the city government further with no one opposing. Well, there's going to be opposition, and I'm hoping that Baltimoreans will vote against. The words on the ballot are for and against. And that fortunately it's the last question, so you can find question K, go all the way down to the bottom of the ballot. The last question is question K. Vote against question K.
So let me ask you: is it at the very bottom because it was just added, or was it added at the bottom for a diabolical reason?
No. There are some rules that talk about the way the ballot is structured, and Baltimore City charter amendments are kind of structurally down there. It wasn't put there.
So there's nothing dirty about where it's placed.
But Donnie, there's an interesting thing about this being question K. The last time that I opposed a charter amendment, it was a question K. This was in 1987. Kurt Schmoke had won the Democratic primary and was heading towards winning the mayoralty of Baltimore. And some forces put on this ballot a proposed amendment to the city charter that was going to weaken the office of the mayor, take away some of the powers that the previous mayor, such as William Donald Schaefer, had enjoyed. And we had to oppose that. And we did. We opposed it, and we defeated that question K. So are you still there?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, okay. All right. So here we are again. How many years ago? Someone have to do the arithmetic to tell me how long ago 1987 was. But anyway, so we're back, and so this thing can be defeated, and I think we ought to work hard to do so. I was pleased yesterday that the NAACP, a couple of ministerial groups, and some labor unions, and joined at a little press event we had in front of City Hall yesterday, announcing more opposition to question K. There's an article in the Sun paper today. Their television programs. I think they may have underestimated us. So
is it that the people pushing term limits want to weaken black political strongholds in Baltimore, a 62% black city?
See, I think this may be a test here in Baltimore, because Sinclair Broadcasting and with the Fox stations is all over the country. They're all over the country. And I think they've tried a couple of other things before that. They first started running, and they continue to run just these negative campaigns and just a steady dose of just unfair and unbalanced criticism.
So these are cousins to the J6 people, right?
These are the same forces. Then they started running actual candidates.
Like freak, we call him Freak Nasty, Professor, aka Vigna Raja.
Yes, I mean Fox 45 support for Vigna Raja was reached the point of being ridiculous.
And they still have him on. He needs a shave. I should talk, huh?
Well, but Baltimore voters and the voters of many states
Have rejected him.
Sophisticated. And they saw this. They didn't fall for this, and so this is now the third approach, which let's just destabilize. Let's monkey with the works. Let's monkey with the mess up the election laws and try to put in a recall and that sort of thing. So that's my view as to what's behind this. But I also want people to understand that whoever was sponsoring it is just a bad idea. The last thing that Baltimore needs right now is more instability in its city government. I point out again, we are on our fifth police commissioner in this decade. I've been involved with city government, never in elected office, but working with other people, particularly, let's say, Mayor Smoke. It takes the first term to just
know where the bathroom is.
Yeah, right. Then you get your programs moving in the second term. But Kurt got a lot done, Kurt Smoke, but it was much of it was done in the third term. Baltimore has had 3 really effective mayors since the Second World War. Your first, Tommy D'Alessandro, who was there for 4 terms. He was the builder. He built more schools, more recreation centers, more health centers and things than anybody else. And he was there for 4 terms. It took him a while to do it. Then came William Thomas Schaefer. He was there for 4 terms. And Kurt Smoke was there for 3. Those are the only mayors who've been there longer than 2 terms, and they've been the most effective. But it's not only a matter of mayors. This question came has some other aspects to it that are even just as dangerous. For example, it could have term limits for the controller. There is no logical reason for having term limits on the fiscal watchdog. There you want someone who's been around a long time, who knows where the bodies are. Where the bodies are buried, and both at the city and the state level. There is no reason to have term limits on a controller if you really want the place to run well. Then this question came, has term limits for the city council. I mean, we've got an almost new city council. Out of the 14 people, 7 of them are in their first term. We've only got 2 council members who've been there more than 2 terms. And a legislative body, Congress, the General Assembly, they're never effective unless they have some longevity. They can do effective oversight. The places where they've tried, there've only been a few places that have legislative term limits, and they're generally dissatisfaction with the results. So this is not well intended for Baltimore, and Baltimoreans should vote against question K.
Good deal. Any final thoughts, Professor?
No, but I keep hearing in the media, well, this thing is going to pass. Well, the last question came that I was involved with didn't pass, and people can on their own just spread the word. That last ballot question there, when you look at the ballot, the last tick there is going to be question K, vote against it.
Professor, we have to bring you back. Matter of fact, I have to find you and bring this camera to you. Do you have any public events coming up?
No, not that I'm scheduled. I mean, I'm doing it the hard way, man. And we're going to be handing out leaflets at the farmers markets. You've probably seen the signs going up around town that says "Stop Fox TV Attack on Baltimore. Vote against Question K." And we're just doing this as it goes along. There's no formal organization. This is a truly grassroots effort, and all citizens that are listening can conduct their own individual campaigns. There's not time enough to put together any formal structure, but every day I hear of another group that has got the message, that understands that this is not in Baltimore's interest.
Professor Gibson, thank you for joining us. I want you to know that truly I'm honored to be in your presence. I stand on your shoulders. I stand on Kurt Schmoke's shoulders. You know, my journalism career began under him here in Sandtown, Winchester, and have been doing it ever since. When I first met him, I was waiting on him down at Harrison's Pier 5, he and the family. And he kept his foot in my hind parts and said, "When are you going back to school?" He would never let up.
Well, I thank you for giving me this opportunity today. Thank you.
Good deal. Have a great day.
All right.
Yes, sir. I've been talking with the one and only Professor Larry Gibson about term limits here in the city of Baltimore. Joining us now on a different topic, we have E.V. Paul. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. So glad to join you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we must thank Karen Sagal, because I said that Larry Gibson is tenacious. Karen Sagal is tenacious too when it comes to public relations, PR. She's very thorough, and that's what I love about her.
She's doing a great job for me.
Well, yeah, she's like a pit bull. She will not let go. I mean, in terms of business tenacity, business acumen, and she's thorough. If she calls you, she'll follow up and make sure that means so much to a small operation like ours, you know. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of help running around.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, Mr. Paul, my grandfather passed of diabetes at the young age of 44. Never got a chance to meet him, Sam Glover. That's something that you deal with? Diabetes?
No.
What's your topic?
No, there's a little diabetes in my family, but nothing direct.
Well, what are we talking about today?
The Baltimore Road Wars, the book that I wrote about the road wars. Stop the Road, Stories from the Trenches of Baltimore's Road Wars.
So you have a book?
Yeah.
Do you have it with you?
Oh, yeah.
The Road Wars.
Yeah. Let's see. There we go.
Now, what is a road wars? It's like the Nowhere Highway?
Yeah, the Highway to Nowhere. Yep, that's the story behind that is very central to this. It's also about the highways that we're going to go through: Federal Hill, Canton, Inner Harbor East, and Fells Point. There's sort of there are two main themes. One is that had those highways been built, the later waterfront renewal of all those historic areas, Federal Hill, Fells Point, and Canton, probably would have been prevented or would have been a shadow of what later happened. But the parallel story on the other side of the fence is the Highway to Nowhere, that went through Harlem Park. We did a lot of research on what happened there, and then
I tell you what happened. A whole bunch of black people got displaced.
That's right.
And now it's a big empty space. Did it ever dawn on you that would be a nice place to send the dirt bikers?
I've heard that. I've heard that comment, and I think it's one of the things that people are considering. Now, I'm not on the inside of that in any way, shape, or form. But just to complete my thought there, the other African American neighborhoods that were affected by the highway issue are Rosemont and Sharp Leadenhall. And the Sharp Leadenhall is one that has a really interesting history. But if you want, I'll start with the Highway to Nowhere.
Okay, but Sharp Leadenhall, for the record, that's South Baltimore.
Yeah, that's right on the east side of the football stadium, nestled in between Federal Hill and the football stadium, basically.
Going towards Port Covington.
Yeah.
Okay, start where you want.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start with the Highway to Nowhere. Your viewers probably understand a little bit of the background on this, that the highway was built and then was never connected up to the rest of I-70. And many people regard it as a huge symbol of the city's unfair policies toward the African American community. And it is doubly hurtful and doubly difficult for people to remember because it never had any transportation benefit. It saves commuters, about a minute and a half getting into downtown from the west side. So one of the things I wanted to do was, really dig into what happened there. How did we ended up with this little 1.3 mile section of what was supposed to be I-70 that never got connected up? And none of this makes the city look very good, and it sure doesn't make William Donald Schaefer look very good either. So the course of events were that in 1972, Leakin Park activists succeeded in court to stop the segment through Leakin Park, which is just west of the Highway to Nowhere. So there was a court injunction. It was not necessarily the final word. It required new hearings, and it required new impact statements. So at the time, it was not necessarily viewed as the death knell for the Leakin Park segment. 1 year later, the Franklin Mulberry segment, which we now know as the Highway to Nowhere, went under construction, despite the fact that the Leakin Park segment was still a huge question mark. The way things progressed, the Franklin Mulberry section was built. All those people, about 3,000 people, were relocated, and Harlem Park was sent on a downward spiral from which it never recovered. And the Leakin Park segment Schaefer finally gave that up in 1981, 8 years later. But the thing that really makes Schaefer look not good in this is that he knew the risk that the highway may never link up, and he also really didn't pursue the Leakin Park segment very energetically. It was a low priority, and it languished and then was finally dropped. 3,000 people were relocated so that commuters could gain a minute and a half on their trek from the western suburbs into downtown. So it really it reveals a city decision-making process that was very flawed. I can find no record that the city ever stopped to even consider the possibility that the highway to nowhere would never link up and that maybe it shouldn't be built. So it
Do
was.
you understand why? I mean, have we gone below the surface? You do know that Baltimore, for instance, had the largest population of Black people prior to the Civil War, and that there's always been this question of the Negro dilemma, what to do with all of these Black people. And so when we look at what's happened in Cross Keys, I didn't know that there was a Black community in Cross Keys. When we look at the story we've been covering this week, Hose Heights, that's a little Black community off Falls Road. You look at Wilson Park, Morgan Park, or if you look at J. Barry Mahul, I don't know if he came up in your research, but he was the mayor back in 1910. And the people from Roland Park went to Mayor J. Barry Mahul and said that they wanted to have a suburban garden community. And not only that, they wanted an ordinance passed that Black people couldn't move in there.
Oh, yeah.
And then they went so far as to say they wanted added to that an ordinance that white people couldn't move into Black neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And so it's like the everyday person in Baltimore, Black and white, have suffered because of the wishes of those with money.
Right. You were speaking of the Preston Gardens project. Is that the when the city built Preston Gardens, the park there next to St. Paul Street, between St. Paul and Calvert Street, that was regarded as a quote unquote Negro removal project. Is that the one you were speaking of?
No, Hose Heights is off of Falls Road.
Yes, I know that, but you also alluded to Mount Vernon, didn't you?
No, Cross Keys.
Okay. Well, Preston Gardens.
I didn't know about this.
That Mayor Preston in I think 1913 authorized an acquisition of a mostly African American, lower to middle income area that was next to Mount Vernon and north of City Hall. And that became what we call Preston Gardens, which is that linear park just on the east side of St. Paul Street, west of Calvert Street.
Down by the courthouse where the lawyers are, the big buildings.
Yeah.
Right there by the Mercy Hospital.
Yeah, the park there.
That's called Preston Park.
Yep. That was
with the fancy steps.
Yes, right. With the fancy steps, a couple of fountains that I don't think are working anymore. Yeah. That was regarded as one of the first uses. Yeah, one of the first uses of urban renewal to remove an African American community.
Man, I've got some historian buddies who would love to talk to you. I mean, as you're talking, I know we're getting off topic, but the penitentiary, you know the history of the Maryland State Penitentiary?
No.
It was a slave quarters. It was a slave dock.
How about
that was the purpose of prisons initially, lock up Black people.
Yeah. Well,
so this book, where are you going with it? And what's the, as they say, what's the so what of the story?
Okay, the so what of the story? Well, there are three main themes, and I think any one of the themes would have made a good book. But so you get a threefer with my book. So the story behind how the Baltimore historic waterfront was saved from the highways from 1961 to 1960 to about 1973. Federal Hill and the Inner Harbor were under threat of a highway that would have crossed the harbor right there at Federal Hill and and then there would have been an interchange where Inner Harbor East is, and then it would have followed the waterfront through Fells Point and Canton, going right through the heart of both of those communities. And had that highway been built, the later reinvestment that happened, young people moving in, renovating houses, giving new life to old communities, a lot of that would have been prevented. So that's theme number one.
Slow down. I need you to break that down a little more. I've almost caught it. There was going to be a highway that goes through the harbor.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Had it happened, it would have. Your conclusion is it would have destroyed residential opportunities.
Oh yeah. I mean, who wants to live next to a super highway?
No one.
Right.
So I gotta ask you, and I'm not an engineer, but from an engineering standpoint, would the highway have made sense?
Strictly from an engineering point of view, yeah, sure.
But it would have destroyed communities.
Yeah.
And what I did not hear you say was, I'm presuming race was not as much a factor, just as much as common sense was. It was just bad for people, where the one on Preston Garden was racial, clearly.
Yes. That's mostly accurate. Yes. But there was a wonderful coalition that developed around the highway issue that was really the first large-scale multiracial movement in Baltimore. It was called the Movement Against Destruction, MAD. And it was the first time really that Black folks and white folks worked together. And
what year was this, Mr. Paul?
That was 1968.
The year of the riots.
The year of the riots. That's right. Yeah, Black folks and white folks came together and supported each other.
Wasn't that how it was supposed to be, Mr. Paul?
Yeah. Yeah, but this,
I'm sure, Mr. Paul,
had never happened before.
Mr. Paul, I know you know some white people you were pushing the harbor, because I know some Black people I would push in the harbor. So how we get stuck on race is sad, because good and bad come in all flavors.
Yeah. So the second major theme is that theme of that the African American communities were largely victimized by the highway plans. Two of the highways that were built, the Highway to Nowhere through Harlem Park and Poppleton, and through Sharp Leadenhall, and Sharp Leadenhall has a really interesting history, but Sharp Leadenhall was victimized actually 3 times, 2 highway plans and 1 urban renewal plan. It was, if you go back a little bit in history, a community of about 5,000 people. And going back further into history, pre-Civil War, it was the center of African American freedmen. And,
South Baltimore.
Yeah. Yep. And after the highway went through there, this is actually I-395, the connector between 995 and downtown, there were only 500 people left in that community. But an amazing community leader named Mildred Moon helped bring that community back to at least, not to its former history, but at least it survives, and there are still people around to tell its history.
Mildred Moon.
Mildred Moon, yeah.
She's a Black lady?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yep. There's a bridge in South Baltimore, the Hamburg Street Bridge, that was renamed the Mildred Moon Bridge.
Wow.
And she was just an amazing person. everyone I've spoken to that know her, they just regard her as really impressive, and she was able to help rebuild at least a little bit of Sharp Leadenhall, even though her constituents were, 500 African Americans in an overwhelmingly white district of South Baltimore, and other parts of Southwest Baltimore. So she really deserves a lot of credit. But Sharp Leadenhall, and this is the most fun thing about researching this book. I dived into the history of each of these areas that were affected by the highways. And Sharp Leadenhall, as I mentioned, was a center for African American freedmen before the Civil War. And I was really interested in, how did that happen? And it has a lot to do with the Quakers who were settling in that quarter of Baltimore. And the Quakers were vehement abolitionists.
They built Friends School, right?
Yes, yeah. They built the first African American school and the first African American church, and established the Baltimore Abolitionist Society. So African Americans were drawn to that area because it was an area where their presence was not resisted and was really welcomed.
Look, Paul, why are you bringing this history? People don't want to hear about good things and people getting along and having mutual lovers. Why are you starting trouble?
Yeah, I know. But
God bless you, Mr. Paul. You have put a smile on many people's faces this morning. And you certainly warm my heart.
We're good.
It's racism is tiring.
Yeah.
It's like, don't you have anything else to do? Go walk the dog.
Yeah.
Who wants to fight all the time?
Yeah. Well, let me, if you don't mind, I'll keep going with Sharp Leadenhall because it gets even more interesting, I think. So a lot of the attraction of Sharp Leadenhall comes down to one person, a Quaker named Elijah Tyson. Tyson Street in Mount Vernon is named for him. And he was not just an abolitionist, he was also on the Underground Railroad. Not only that, he had his own vigilante group that went after the guys from the South who were coming to kidnap slaves and former slaves and take them back.
Elijah Tyson was like John Brown.
Well, maybe a little bit.
I love John Brown. I wrote about him in my book. As a matter of fact, as you were talking about Tyson, John Brown made Kansas attractive to Black people. The Kansas Jayhawkers, because Kansas wanted to join the country, they had to choose whether they were going to be a slave state or a free state. And the Jayhawkers and John Brown said, no, this is going to be a free state. They didn't want to support slavery. Wow. You done I got a new hero.
So, and it even goes beyond that. Many of those African-American freedmen who settled in Sharp Leadenhall owed their freedman status to Mr. Tyson. He used his wealth to pay for the legal costs of establishing freedman status. So when Tyson died in, I want to say 1830 or something like that, 10,000 African Americans, which was 2/3 of the city's whole population of African Americans, attended his funeral. 10,000 people. He was such a hero to the
What year?
folks.
What year?
Around 1830. I don't remember the date exactly.
Wow.
So
Wow.
so
He was the mayor.
yeah. So he, anyway. So, but researching these neighborhoods that were affected by the highways was one of the, I don't know, really rewarding things about writing this book.
Is this your first book?
Yeah.
Get out.
I'm a lifelong city planner, and I've done a lot of writing. This is the first time I've written a book that's more human interest and less social science. So I'm still waiting for the reviews to come in. But
we're going to take our books. You and I, we're going to go find Oprah, and one of us got to get on there.
Okay. So
both of us have to get on there. We need your book. The world needs to know about it. Can you hold the book up? We want to sell this book. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Stop the Road.
Yeah.
Stories from the trenches of Baltimore's road wars. And you're a former city planner. You know everything. You know where the bodies are buried for real.
Oh, maybe a couple. So while we're on history, when I dived into the history of Fells Point, a lot of that is fairly well known, but there's a piece that's not so well known, is that Fells Point was a huge center for the slave trade. And part of that has to do with our clipper ships, which are part of Baltimore lore, and
there's a difference between the clipper ship and the big ships. The clippers were fast. They, like back in the day, they would be your speedboats. So that's when you're trying to do a quick mission.
Right. So the clipper ships were part of the successful, or at least partially successful, effort in the War of 1812, and to a little bit lesser degree all the way back to the Revolution, because the U.S. didn't have much of a navy. But
compared to England.
But bring it back to slavery, and why was Fells Point a center for slavery? And it has partly to do with the clipper ships, because of them being so fast and maneuverable, and because the Baltimore seamen were adept at sailing them. They were the preferred ship of the slave traders after the slave trade was abolished. I believe that was in the 1820 something, when the slave trade was abolished. Many decades ahead of when slavery was abolished.
But behind other countries.
Yeah. And so the illegal slave trade continued after 1820, and the clipper ships were the preferred ship of the slave traders because of that fast and maneuverable aspect, and they were able to evade the authorities. Anyway, lots of interesting history that I've been able to uncover for this book.
As you're talking, Louisiana comes to mind. Did you find any correlation, any relationship between? Because I've heard many times how Baltimore, here at the port, there was a connection between Baltimore's port and New Orleans port in terms of slave business, the slave trade.
Yes, I think a fair amount of the slave trade was back and forth with New Orleans. It's not something that I particularly researched.
But Baltimore's port, commerce, Fells Point. When you look at the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, that book, he talks about Fells Point, learning to read. He talked about he tricked a little white kid into teaching him his letters, or however that went down.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
over there also, did you come across anything about Isaac Myers?
Yeah, yeah, he was I think he was the owner of the black shipyard that was in Fells Point.
And he helped create the Black Labor Union.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
First national Black Labor Union.
Yeah.
To my understanding, he was one of the spearheaders as he helped Baltimore ship caulkers develop a union. That idea, Baltimore, from good and bad, Baltimore is a part of American history that many of us don't know. I mean, it's so much deep. Fort McHenry is maybe a symbol, but Baltimore is a part of American history. And I just hope we can get it together here. We can get along. We should be able to get together for more than just a football game. Like Memorial Stadium. You talk about good, black people and white people. Memorial Stadium, that was a place where everybody, I don't ever remember seeing a fight at Memorial Stadium, ever. Not in my lifetime. Junior Orioles, Colts, that was Baltimore. We got along. We lived together. We enjoyed each other, But we've been so segregated. That's your area. This is my area. Never the twain shall meet.
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked about two themes to the book. One being kind of saving the historic waterfront, which relates more to the white community, the unfairness of the highway plans in the black community. And the third theme is just this sort of amazing story that the Baltimore's economic and political establishment were 100% in favor of these highways, but the activists beat them. How often does that happen? Not very often in my experience. So I wanted to really dig into, who were these people and how did they manage this? How did they manage to overthrow the establishment and stop these highways? And for your audience in particular, I'll just go through a couple of the African-American heroes, unsung heroes of the road wars, if you will. Rosemont is the neighborhood that is essentially between Franklin Mulberry, the highway to nowhere, and Leakin Park. The highway was supposed to go right through the middle of Rosemont. Rosemont at the time was this, really together middle-class African-American neighborhood. All the homes were well kept, very high home ownership.
1950s.
So this is the plan to go through Rosemont was established in 1957, but the acquisitions, the authority for eminent domain and so on, happened in the mid 60s. And then the road wars were mostly from the mid 60s through the late 70s. So Rosemont, this really stable, well-functioning community. The highway was supposed to go right through the middle of it, and there were two people that
said hell no.
That arguably saved Rosemont. Joe Wiles and Mary Rosemont. And
these are white folks?
Nope. These are black folks.
Joe Wiles and Mary Rosemont.
Rosemond, M-O-N-D. Yeah. Yes. So Joe Wiles, from everybody I've spoken to, who well, Joe Wiles was a guy who was really good at kind of behind the scenes, quietly arm twisting, that kind of thing. He wasn't allowed out there, carrying your signs and shouting at the mayor. He was the guy who was able to convince people, just by the strength of his personality. He was just regarded as this amazing person, and there was a book written called the Big Roads, a national book about the building of the interstate highways, and one chapter of that book is named "The Human Obstacle," and out of the thousands of anti-highway activists all across the country. This is the whole system. This isn't just Baltimore. The author chose Joe Wiles to represent the human obstacle, and he goes into.
I've never heard of this man.
Yeah, this is the thing that I found so fun about researching the road wars. I feel like I got to know all these people, and now I'm hoping people get the book so they'll get to know them too.
Get you some exposure.
Yeah. Anyway, so Joe Wiles and Mary Rosemont.
How did you learn about Joe Wiles? I mean, it's not an easily researchable name.
It was other folks who were involved in the movement against destruction. Art Cohen.
Oral tradition.
You mean you mean just oral passed down, I guess you could say. There are still a number of folks around who were involved in the highway wars, and I've interviewed them all. There are 55 interviews that are represented in this book. And I think it was Art Cohen, who was one of the presidents of Movement Against Destruction, who told me about the book, The Big Roads, and how I should pay attention to Joe Wiles. So I got the records of the Rosemont Community Association, read the book, The Big Roads. And it's an amazing story.
Why do you care?
Why do I care? I mean, the highway wars were such a significant event for Baltimore that, I think we all need to get to know the people who changed Baltimore in mostly for the better, saving the waterfront, and in the case of Rosemont, saving Rosemont. These are unsung heroes that need to be sung, I think. And Mary Rosemont was also interesting. She actually went through this relocation thing twice. When she was a child in Jacksonville, her mother's home was relocated for a highway.
Florida?
Jacksonville, Florida. Yep. And then when she moved to Baltimore, she moved to Rosemont, only to discover that the highway was going to go through her home here too. And, I mentioned this because to many of my readers, my white middle class or upper middle class white readers, they're going to say, wow, that must be an unbelievable coincidence to get moved twice for a highway or an urban renewal project. And unfortunately, it was not unusual in the African American community.
This was a practice. This was a common practice.
Yeah. And, some of the folks in Sharp Leadenhall had to move once for the highway and once for the urban renewal plan. It's a part of our past history that really needs to be told. We're going through a whole reckoning on race in this country, and the story behind these highways in the city, I think, deserves a place there. People know a little bit about the Highway to Nowhere, but I've got a lot in the book about that. And then there's Sharp Leadenhall and Rosemont too. All examples of, to some degree, if not quote unquote Negro removal, at least a low regard of functioning African American communities.
Mr. Paul, how can we sell this book? website would you like me to put up?
Oh, www stop dash the dash road.com.
We got to bring you back, and we got to make sure you get more exposure. No,
that would be great. Thank you.
Is this it? Stop-the-road.com?
Yes.
Where would you like to go with this book? Where do you want to go? You want to go to Oprah? I mean, of course, we all want to get to Oprah without books. Do you want to? Is the Baltimore Brew, the Afro? I mean, certainly the Afro and the Baltimore Times should be all over this, but so too should the Baltimore Banner. I mean, they claim to replace the Baltimore Sun. They bought up all of the Sun reporters.
Yeah. We did get coverage in the Sun.
Good.
And some coverage in one of the online newspapers. I'm forgetting which one.
We're going to send this interview all over the world.
Okay, thanks. This is not just a Baltimore story. This is a story of great significance of what happened. The road wars in the 60s and 70s were very interconnected to the civil rights movement and to the anti-war movement, protest in general.
I got a planning question for you, and this is totally separate. Who came up with the Baltimore subway route? Who thought that was a good idea? I mean, around the same time, Atlanta was building a subway, and instead of building a one leg to nowhere train system, they built a north-south leg and an east-west leg. And so it created an egalitarian subway system that actually services the people of Atlanta, wherever you live.
Right.
But our subway, is the planning of our subway rooted in the same type of thinking?
Yeah.
Bad.
Okay. Well, my take on that, and I can't say very much about the routing of the subway, but Baltimore missed out on an enormous opportunity to advance our subway and mass transit system to make it a more complete system. And it all has to do, unfortunately, with Mayor William Donald Schaefer and the highway blinders that he had on. So in 1973, Congress adopted what was called Bust the Trust legislation. Prior to 1973, there were a series of highway user taxes and gas taxes which were devoted solely to building interstate highways. That's the only thing that money could be used for. In 1973, Congress adopted the Bust the Trust legislation, which allowed cities to shift highway money to mass transit if they decided that was their priority. And the old formula, I mean, this was 90% federal money, 10% local money. So it was the most beneficial source of funds that cities were trying to latch on to. And a lot of highways were built that probably shouldn't have built just because, politicians wanted that money coming into their community. After the Bust the Trust legislation, Baltimore had an enormous opportunity. We had about $900 million, maybe $1 billion that were budgeted for the highways that could have been shifted to transit. And then we would have, let's suppose that we built something like the Red Line back in the 1970s instead of the failed attempt in the 2010s. So
My dad's business closed down when they built that subway at State Center. He had a business down in the 800 block of Madison Avenue.
Oh yeah.
Madison Avenue was a one-way street on that end. So when they blocked off MLK, he couldn't have funerals down there. Broke his heart. And so when people talk about the red lines and these various lines, I'm slow to accept them only because I remember when they did the West Side redevelopment, right there on Utah Street, Lexington Market, Ecuador Hat Company. If you love Baltimore, then you know about Ecuador Hat Company. We loved Ecuador Hat Company, and they were displaced, and they didn't even follow through with the plans. And so it bothers me that Baltimore is so anti-business. Down there at Cross Street Market, they had a flower shop. Now that flower shop is now not far from there, over towards, I want to say, Wacomico Street. But that flower store that was inside Cross Street Market, I love that flower store. You could get all kinds of combinations, and the people were so nice, but they moved those people from Cross Street Market all the way over there towards the hot damn highway somewhere. And I don't get how we kill. It is so hard to build a business. And then at somebody's whim, that business, whether it's legacy or generational, it's gone.
Yeah.
I hate that about Baltimore. We're so anti-business. Or you got businesses, somebody put some trash out and they'll go and give the business a fine, never looking to see if that business put the trash out there or somebody just dumped it. We are so anti-business. Have we always been anti-business? Are we afraid of progress? What's wrong with progress?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I noticed in doing the Road Wars research was that there were impact statements that were prepared when we were acquiring, a whole strip of land for the highway corridor. And these impact statements did nothing more than count the number of houses and the number of people that were being relocated. They didn't even look at the businesses that were being relocated. And Harlem Park had a lot of local shops there. And so did Rosemont and Sharp Leadenhall to a lesser degree. I don't know that Baltimore is on the whole anti-business, but from the research that I did in the Road Wars, it was all acceptable collateral damage for getting these highways built.
You didn't mention the projects. That was a huge, and that happened under Smoke administration. We just had Larry Gibson on. Those high rises, Lafayette, Flag, Lexington Terrace, Murphy Homes.
Right. Well,
my dad said it like this. I don't want you to get in no trouble. My dad said, and it's been stated on this show this week, that the projects were not meant to be multi-generational. Supposed to be a temporary stopover, get your stuff together, and move on to a bright opportunity. But after a while, and I mean, given this history, this sordid history that you're sharing, damn, who would want to move? But when the projects went down, a lot of people were displaced and moved to other parts, I mean, of the state, like Baltimore County. And I remember a recent election out in Baltimore County, and one candidate was like, "Oh, stop all these people moving out here," and the other ones were a little more democratic, a little more willing.
Yeah.
But this segregation is poisoning us. Yeah. I live here, you live there, and never the twain shall meet except on Sundays at the football games. We can do better than this.
Yeah. Well, I'm completely with you there.
Have you ever thought about running for mayor?
No, geez, no. You mentioned the projects, and my window onto that again is through the road wars. But I believe that a significant part of the building of those high rises was to accommodate people who were being displaced by highways and urban renewal, because it was not politically acceptable to move those people into other neighborhoods. So the only way to accommodate them was by building up the density and locating them in the communities that were already, lower income and African American.
Man, I remember going in Flag House Project. These are some of my wilder days in Baltimore. I remember climbing that stairwell, and there were a few people in the stairwell with Uzi machine guns. This is back in the 80s and 90s, but there are certain aspects of the projects, yeah, you would get killed. Black or white, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Too much poverty concentrated. I mean, look at Cabrini Green in Chicago.
Yeah.
As they came down, then the people are going to go somewhere. So I get it that, you got to move people around, but it's got to be done with love. And it's either light or darkness. You either want to make the world better, or you want to make the world just for a certain group of people. I hope we can move beyond that. I hope our children and grandchildren can inherit a better world. But you ought to be commended, Mr. Paul, because I imagine, did you get kicked back? Did you get people like, damn, there he goes again? Or
yeah. I mean, there were. I've gotten a couple of those kind of comments on Facebook. When I post something about the road wars and especially the impact on the African American communities. I've gotten a couple of comments that I interpreted as, I don't know, sort of Trumpian. But mostly not.
Well, you and our family now, Mr. Paul. So if they mess with you, they mess with me. So,
okay.
Yeah, you give me a call if you have any problems.
Okay, thanks.
I'm no tough Tony, but I have learned the power of the ink pen.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you followed our story, but right now, the people in Hose Heights, they're being denied an access road that they've had privy to for over 100 years because there are certain folks in Roland Park, including Councilwoman Odette Ramos, who feel like their presence is irrelevant. They shouldn't have a say. I mean, I don't know how else to characterize it.
Wow.
It's a big water tower up there, and the water tower has been refurbished. And I've never been to Hose. Let me tell you, Mr. Paul, there are places in Baltimore that we all have to go and see. There's so much history here.
Yeah. The Hose Heights one is not one that I've paid attention to. Can't really comment on that one.
It is fascinating. It's right off of Falls Road. I went to Poly, and let me tell you, the white boys up there fight. They are not chumps. They not softies. You go up there to Poly, you may have to fight on Falls Road. But at the same time, these black people live right there. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
But it's a lot. The history goes back to the 1800s. Okay, so let's put the plug up one more time. And, you have to come and join us again. And however we can help get the message out about your book. Do you have any book signings coming up?
Not yet. I was supposed to have one at the Fells Point Fun Festival, but the vestiges, the leftover of the hurricane canceled the whole festival. So I'm starting to work on a couple of launch events.
We can create our own book fair.
Yeah.
You know people, I know people. We can bring some people out together.
Okay, cool.
We can make Baltimore better. Everybody should have a place under the sun.
Yeah, absolutely.
We appreciate you, and many thanks again to Karen Sagal. Any final thoughts?
Oh, if if you want me to keep going, I'll keep going. I mean, there's another guy that I like to hold up as a wonderful example of community leadership. His name was John Wells. He was president of what was called the Relocation Action Movement, RAM. Baltimore had some pretty clever acronyms for their anti-highway groups. Anyway, John Wells, at the time, this was Harlem Park and West Baltimore, and at the time, there wasn't very much leverage that they had. They weren't a historic area. They didn't have parks that were going through or anything like that. So they concentrated on the fair market value issues and the issues related to renters that were being kicked out of their apartments. And with John Wells' leadership, African American guy, and he was a former bus driver and former resident of public housing who had moved into the Franklin Mulberry corridor. Under John Wells' leadership, they were able to get a reform through, not just Baltimore City, not just the state of Maryland, but the federal government adopted a policy under which these highway acquisitions could be based on what was called it was an upgrade from fair market value, fair replacement value. And that could be as much as $5,000, which $5,000 back in 1968 is over maybe $33,000 today. So this was not chump change. So it was, an amazing thing that this guy was able to do this, leading his community. He got the mayor and the governor on his side, got a bill through the state legislature. And he could have been an incredible leader of Harlem Park if the city had said, whoa, maybe we don't need to build Franklin Mulberry because we've got this injunction over at Leakin Park. Let's build a light rail line instead through this corridor. And by the way, Mr. Wells, thank you. Would you mind kind of taking a position of leadership in this community and helping us bring it back? And man, he would have stayed in the city. Instead, he used his $5,000 surplus over fair market value, and he moved to Baltimore County because we treated him so badly. He was one of the very early African Americans that broke the color barrier in the Northwest Corridor, Randallstown area.
What year was this?
So this would have been 1969, I think.
So this was the beginning. This was the beginning of the exodus of blacks out to Liberty Road.
Yeah.
69. So that's 50 years.
Yeah.
As you mentioned Leakin Park, my sister got her wings and went home to glory this year. But I got to tell you, my sister could drive Windsor Mill Road from the county to the city in all of 3 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a family joke. She was oh my God. She tore Windsor Mill Road up. I guess she was trying to get rid of me. Good old days. Now, also, has Leakin Park always had the stigma that it does today?
Okay. No. Leakin Park is a completely different example of what happened with the highway wars. But Leakin Park is an example of a pretty rare phenomenon. It's kind of a wilderness park in the city. And
Mr. Paul, I don't want you to be confused. They dump bodies in Leakin Park.
Oh yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, they do. And
okay. I just wanted to make sure you knew where I was coming from.
Oh yeah.
As a black man, I know that is one place you don't go camping. You don't go just walking on a nature walk. That's not a person in Lincoln Park. I know it's changed. I know it's not like that, but that's what we heard as a kid. You're gonna get dumped out Lincoln Park. Who wants to get dumped out there?
Yeah, but those bodies all originated somewhere else. You're not in danger walking on those trails. That's what people think, and that's why Lincoln Park is not kind of on the beaten path for people who would be attracted to parks like that.
But there's some beautiful. I mean, the stream. There's a stream.
Oh yeah,
alongside the road. It's just so peaceful there.
Yeah,
very peaceful, very beautiful.
Yeah, and a lot
Leon
of
Day is back there too. Leon Day Field.
Oh yeah,
More on the city side.
Right. Yeah. And the fight to save Lincoln Park involved another African American hero, Norman Reeves, who was a city councilman starting in 1979, and then he unfortunately passed away in 1983. He was a
4 years after getting into office. That sounds like a hit, Mr. Paul.
Oh, geez. He was another just amazing person.
What was his name?
Norman Reeves.
I've heard that name before. You got me doing, man. Thank you for the history.
He was a muscular dystrophy victim and had a lot of difficulty just getting around. But he was a guy who would not let his disability slow him down, and he was very active in civil rights and in this in the protest against the Lincoln Park segment.
So have you done a special? I know we keep cutting you off. Is your book at the Pratt Library? Have you done a talk at the Pratt Library?
Not yet. The book only came out about 2 weeks ago, and right now it's still only paperback. The hardback version is coming soon, and I'm going to ramp up some events when I've got the hardbacks, because people like to get signed copies of hardbacks.
Well, you just taught me something. The hardbacks cost more, though.
Yes.
They had to get these paperbacks for now. Okay. So are there any book signings on the schedule?
No, the only one that was on the schedule was for the Fells Point Fun Festival, and that got canceled. That was the hurricane. It was supposed to rain.
Are you willing to come out and sell your book?
Oh, sure.
Okay, well, what is your number?
Telephone number? 202-329-4282.
$4282.
Mm-hmm.
We have to bring you out to some of the events so you can sell that book. I want people to know about it. I want Annapolis to know about it. I want City Hall to know about it. I want the White House to know about it.
Okay, well, you're shooting even a little higher than I am there, but I'm along for the ride.
Throw the United Nations in. We've done an event. Our first event in New York City was at the United Nations. It's time that people of light. When I meet a Mr. Paul, I am reminded of Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke said the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Thank you for doing something, Mr. Paul.
Okay. Well, it's been a fun project, and it's fun talking to guys like you, Donnie. I appreciate it.
We're going to do our part, and big ups again to Karen Sagal. She is a tenacious public relations, a publicist, and I enjoy working with her. She always brings unique stories, and I have been enriched by today. You've given me so much. Norman Reeves, I've heard the name, and this is where I really miss my dad, because he was big on history, but I guess now that I have to pick up the mantle myself. Okay, we're going to get out of here, Mr. Paul. I see we could do this all day long.
Okay.
But thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Don.
Good morning, world.